Friends, this morning we're going on a little road trip before we hear our gospel reading. And we first head southeast, which we would probably all want to do, to the warm sun and white beaches of Florida. In 2018, Robert Goodman had been a history teacher for over 23 years at Palm Beach Gardens Community High School in Florida. In April of that year, he learned that he had stage 3 colon cancer. Moving quickly, his doctors put him on the fast track for chemotherapy, forcing him to use 38 of his sick days for doctor's appointments and chemotherapy, along with those necessary days of rest afterward. In the middle of his treatment, Mr. Goodman learned that he was going to be short 20 sick days needed to complete his chemotherapy. Without these days, he would either have to go back to work in the schools, his body now fully immunocompromised, or he would have to quit his job and lose all of his health insurance. Before resorting to have to decide between these two options, Mr. Goodman attempted a third option. He started begging. Setting aside what little dignity he had left, Mr. Goodman posted on Facebook seeking out any district employees who might be willing to donate their sick leave to carry him through his chemotherapy treatments. Teachers, staff members, administrators, and even lunchroom workers saw that post, and they transferred 75 sick days to Mr. Goodman. This truly remarkable act of goodwill allowed Mr. Goodman to receive his treatment, and he continues to live and to teach to this very day. Thank God for loving communities and for good neighbors. But are we missing the point? We move from the Sunshine State and we saunter north to the faintly frozen Flint, Michigan. As you may recall, in 2015, water quality testing confirmed lead contamination in the city's entire water supply system, thereby forcing the state, the city, and federal governments to declare a state of emergency. As the governments struggled to begin the daunting task of replacing the entire water system, people began to get thirsty. In the first year of the declared emergency, the state of Michigan delivered cases of bottled water each week to 2,700 families. But after that year, water was still provided by the state, but residents had to pick it up at a centralized location. This small change in access left those without transportation, those homebound folks, those experiencing homelessness without water. The people were getting thirsty again. That's when Flint area churches stepped in, following Jesus' command to give drink to the thirsty. With the state of Michigan providing the water, an interdenominational group of 12 people brought cases of bottled water to the doorsteps of not just the 2,700 households, but 3,500 families each week. Leaning on grants and donations to pay for the workers, for the trucks, and for the fuel, this program worked tirelessly to ensure that area residents had clean, safe drinking water. Today, a good percentage of Flint's residents are able to safely use water from their taps, provided that they have the government-funded water testing, the water filters, and the replacement cartridges. While pipe replacement continues, it has been by the generosity and diligent work of the residents of the community that their neighbors have been able to drink safe, clean water. Thank God for loving communities and good neighbors. But are we missing the point? Our journey continues, moving from the streets of Flint to our very own backyard, where more than 60 local grocers are participating and partnering with Ozarks Food Harvest to raise funds to feed our neighbors. Now, in its 23rd year, the Check Out Hunger campaign provides funding to reach over 30,000 individuals weekly and provides more than 23 million meals annually across its 28-county service area. The program arose out of the needs that you and I bear witness to every day. 1 in 5 of our neighbor children and 1 in 6 of our adult neighbors have no idea where their next meal will come from. Food insecurity isn't just a local issue. The lack of consistent access to enough food for an active, healthy life leaves more than 37 million Americans hungry each night. So the Ozarks Food Harvest partners with over 270 local food pantries and organizations to help ease those hunger pangs in our neighbors' stomachs while also working to change systemic issues that perpetuate food insecurity, the lack of affordable housing, social isolation, chronic or acute health problems, high medical costs, low wages, unaffordable and inaccessible childcare. It is only when grocery store customers add $1, $3, or $5 of tax-free donations to their grocery bill that our hungry neighbors will find food on their tables. It is when we who have the means come together to meet this ever-growing need that those without can eat again. It is when you and I open our hands and give and that we love that they are able to eat. Thank God for our loving communities and our good neighbors. But are we missing the point? And our travels close this morning as we venture across space and across time to the temple in Jerusalem where Jesus was teaching a crowd who was listening to him with delight. The people were delighted because Jesus had recently made his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, clearing out the temple of all those corrupt and oppressive money changers and vendors who blocked access to worship God. Jesus stepped into the courts and began once again to denounce the Jewish leadership that has fought tooth and nail to unjustly maintain the status quo. Jesus is here in Jerusalem to challenge the powerful and oppressive institutions, governments, and systems. He is here to call them to return to their upright ways. He is here to suffer unto death for this work and for these words. Jesus speaks to the crowd that stands before him in that temple, and he speaks to us this morning from the Gospel of Mark. Listen for the word of the Lord. As Jesus taught, he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance, they say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth about a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all that she had to live on." This is the word of the Lord. Jesus castigates this class of Jewish teachers, and he praises a poor widow who gave everything she had. Both of these are well known to those of us who have been in the church for years. These words are indeed trustworthy and true, and thanks be to God. But as Jesus speaks to this loving community of good neighbors, I wonder if we have all too often mistaught, misused, and flat out missed the point of Jesus' teaching as he sat there in the temple. The scribes, so often spoke of in the Gospels, were a class within the Jewish leadership who served alongside the chief priests, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees. Tasked with the legal documents, the scribes did not merely just copy them down, but often wrote the most critical and crucial documents related to financial and political matters. And beyond merely just writing up that legal jargon, after the exile and the law's firm establishment at the core of Israel's life, scribes gained further prominence as interpreters and teachers of God's law. The scribes enacted the laws, they interpreted the laws, they taught the laws. The scribes knew the word and were tasked with faithfully applying it, not just to the people that they served, but to they themselves. And they were to faithfully live it out in their own lives and in their work for God. But somewhere along the line, this position of power and service became corrupt, and Jesus warns the people to guard themselves from the scribes, those dry old men wearing brocaded robes who craved power and prestige, seated at their prominent positions of honor in homes and in houses of worship. Jesus warns the people to be wary of the scribes who exploited and abused and profited from the weak and the vulnerable. Jesus warns the people to be wary of the scribes who devour widows' houses, making the helpless homeless while breathing these long-winded, pointless prayers. Jesus warns that these people with power desire attention and recognition, not justice and mercy for all of God's people. Jesus warns that these people will, with the knowledge and the answers, compete for power in the religious arena. They crave the best seats in the synagogues instead of ensuring that all have access to wisdom and knowledge and understanding. Jesus warns that these people with the finest clothes seek to be seen rather than to see the naked and the poor who are all around them. And then Jesus points to the widow giving all that she had. She gave everything that she had, just 2 small coins. Jesus points to her placing them in the temple treasury, not to lift up her faithfulness, but to condemn those in power who had convinced her that she had to give all that she had to ensure their opulent lifestyle. Jesus' teaching here in the temple is an indictment upon any religious system that results in a poor widow giving all that she has so that the system's leaders may continue to live lives of wealth and comfort. Jesus isn't attacking the religious practice, nor is he attacking those who are suffering in poverty, but Jesus is instead condemning the systems and the practices that call for poor widows to sacrifice the last 2 pennies that they have. Jesus here is condemning any system that appropriates the property of the poor and the near destitute in order to perpetuate the wealth of the elite. Jesus is condemning any hypocritical person, system, or institution that walks on the backs of the poor and the powerless, that preys greedily upon others for personal gain, that forces families into futile and infertile fields. I think that the point that we are missing in all of these stories is this: systems and institutions and governments should be held accountable to the way that they treat their workers and their congregations and their voters. And when any of these abuse anyone or misuse anything, we have a calling from Christ to condemn and to criticize and to change them, to restore them to their intended upright ways. I think that we should certainly applaud that community that surrounded and supported Robert Goodman as he and his medical team treated his cancer, but I think that we should also challenge and change the structures that forced him to either beg for paid leave, quit his job, or return to a public school in a fragile and compromised body. We should certainly applaud the 12 individuals who worked diligently to ensure that all of Flint, Michigan had access to clean and safe bottled water, and we should be grateful for those who are working to identify and replace the water supply system, but we should also confront and correct the institutions that allowed the entire crisis to unfold in the first place. We should certainly applaud, and more than anything, we should support Check Out Hunger campaign and the people who ensure that the Ozarks has secure access to food, but we should also denounce and reconstruct the systems that prevent our neighbors from obtaining food and accessing affordable health care and housing and receiving respectable education and child care. And we should certainly applaud the widow's willingness to give all that she owned to the work of the church and to the furthering of God's reign, but we should also call out and clean up the religious institutions and organizations which promise prosperity if their people would just give all that they have to the treasury of the church. Jesus calls us into the same work that he was living out, to bring mercy and justice to the poor and the powerless, to challenge unjust, unethical, and unequitable structures and systems that deny food and drink, clothing and shelter. He calls us to build programs and policies that free those that are imprisoned by evil and hate and mental illness and domestic violence. Jesus calls us to protect the vulnerable and those who are defenseless that live among us in all creation, and Jesus calls us to protect the very creation itself. Jesus calls us to love God and to love our neighbor as much as we love ourselves. Friends, let us stop worrying about the cost of unleaded gas and start worrying about the cost of leaded water. Let us resist the economic violence that comes with capitalism and stand boldly against the economic status quo. Let us divest from evil in all its forms and ensure that economics trickle up. Let us avoid interest gains through selfish means and instead seek interest in our neighbors. May we act in the world for the very least among us, challenging the political and economic systems in the church, in the nation, and in the world. Amen.